Hello, my friends, and welcome to the very first episode of Voices in the Game. I'm Colton the Bias. So, Voices in the Game is going to be a summer interview series that we are going to be doing over the course of the next few months to give you an inside look, as we're going to go beyond the box score and give you an inside look of what it is like to work in the sports industry and to showcase so many incredible people who bring the sports industry to life for all of you who might have an interest in joining us in the sports world. And I am pleased to be joined by our very first guest of Voices in the Game. He is a true veteran on the mic, and he has spent the last 25 years as the voice of the Bucknell Bison. He is Mr. Doug Birdsong. Doug, thank you so much for joining me, my friend. I am so thrilled and honored that you are our first guest of Voices in the Game.
Well, I appreciate it, Colton. I mean, you have been able to work with us for over a year now, and certainly have enjoyed being able to kind of help, hopefully mentor you, but definitely having you aboard.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Doug. So let's get started, Doug. So can you take us back, to the beginning as a boy growing up in Huntington, West Virginia? What drew you to wanting to be a sportscaster? And was there really any particular sporting event that first drew you to say, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life?
Well, oddly enough, I think when I was very young, I remember listening to some disc jockeys on the radio, and we used to have at that time a reel-to-reel tape machine. That's going back a few years, Colton, but reel-to-reel tape machine. I remember I would record my voice and stuff on that, but I didn't necessarily want to go into broadcasting with any kind of degree. But about halfway through my senior year in high school, my plan really from at least my junior year, maybe even halfway through my sophomore year of high school, my plan was to go on to major in art at either a university or art school. And because I was very interested in drawing and so forth. But about halfway through my senior year of high school at Huntington East High School in Huntington, West Virginia, I remember listening to a game, a Marshall at a Mississippi State football game on the radio, and the individual who was calling it, guy by the name of Frank Gardenia, I just thought it was so neat to hear him. And I was playing high school football at the time at Huntington East. And so I had kind of an affinity for football for sure, but other sports as well. And that kind of got me introduced to it. And I thought that would be a really neat job. And so from that point on, halfway through my senior year in high school, I scrapped the plans of being able to go into art and maybe even majoring in art in a college setting or whatever, and ended up going to college to ultimately graduate with a degree in communications. And that right there kind of launched my interest in trying to become a sports broadcaster.
And how was it like for you, Doug, breaking into the industry after you walked across your stage and received your diploma from Marshall?
It's not an, as you well know, Colton. I mean, whether it's now in 2025 or back in 1987 when I graduated from Marshall University in Huntington, it's not an easy proposition. I remember sending out at that time, we used cassette tapes, but I remember sending out a ton of cassette tapes, ton of resumes, just kind of cold calling, sending them out to a bunch of different places, really West Virginia, some in West Virginia, a lot in Tennessee, a bunch in Kentucky as well, and just didn't really get any kind of response. And I'm sure you've kind of been through that too. It gets a little bit discouraging, but about, I'm going to say a month, maybe a month and a half after I graduated, there was an individual at WTCR, which actually was the number one rated radio station in the Huntington market. And the Huntington market was pretty good sized at the time. And they had asked if I would like to be the sports director. It would just be a part-time gig. I would only be doing sportscasts in the morning and so forth, Monday through Friday. And then on Saturdays would help out some. But I said, sure. And after about a month doing that, it ended up that one of the news anchors left at WTCR, and they said, would you like to go into news as well as sports? It would be a full-time job. And I said, sure. So at that point, I anchored the morning news. We had someone who anchored the afternoon and someone who anchored the evening. And that's kind of how I got started. Now, during that time, once it was actually probably my junior year of college at Marshall, all the way through my senior year, and then going into my time at WTCR, I called high school games for a station down in not quite southern West Virginia, but it was off US Route 23 in a place called Fort Gay. I kid you not, Fort Gay, West Virginia. And it is WFGH. It was a high school station, and they carried Fort Gay high school games, but they also carried another high school in that county, Crum High School, another one up in further up in that county, Vinson High School. And so we called high school football games. I actually was the analyst for the first year, my junior year of college, with a great friend of mine, Randy Lee, who has been a long time an announcer. And for the past 15 or 16 years, has been the play-by-play announcer for Western Kentucky University. So he was doing the play-by-play. I was doing the analyst role. Then my senior year in college, I moved over to the play-by-play because he graduated, and had another individual who also had graduated the same time Randy did, and he was my analyst, and did that for the next 3 years, basically 3.5 years, before moving on, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But that's kind of how I got things started.
That's awesome, Doug. And Doug, for any of our viewers, who might not have ever heard of a cassette tape before or don't even know what that is, can you take us through the process of how that was like, to make a cassette tape, and send them out, because it's just a technology, that obviously my generation, has never had to use, for us as broadcasters, it's just we download our videos and then we just get them ready on like Adobe Premiere Pro and edit them. So can you take us through what that was like for you, to make a cassette tape and then sending them out, or around where you grew up in Huntington?
Yeah, I'd be happy to go through it, Colton. And it is, I mean, nowadays, as you said, digital, and you have different programs. If it's video, maybe Adobe or Final Cut, Adobe Premiere or Final Cut Pro. But back then, we'd use those reel-to-reel tapes. We recorded everything on a reel-to-reel tape, and I would get dubs of that. I would dub it onto another reel-to-reel tape, and I would literally splice. We would have a splicing board. The audio tape was about not quite a quarter-inch wide, and you had a metal splicing board. It fit into that area, and there were areas where you could literally use a razor like you would use razor blade to shave, and you would cut the tape. So you would get highlights from whatever game or games you wanted to put on there. You would cut it, splice it together, and then you could go from that using the audio board at WMUL-FM. That was the college radio station at Marshall University. You would be able to go from that 8-inch reel-to-reel tape to a cassette tape, because we had cassette recorders where you could record onto a cassette. And then that was much easier to send out via the U.S. Post Office at that time. There was no FedEx, no maybe UPS, but basically everybody used the U.S. Post Office and just send those out. And that's kind of how things were done. It was more of a physical, in some ways, more of a physical action than what it is now. Obviously, with the digital aspect, that's physical too. But that was kind of how things were done back in the old days.